First off, John, just for the uninitiated, what is a showrunner and what do they do for a series like Dark Winds?
Showrunner is a term which I think got the first person who was officially called a showrunner was John Wells when he was doing ER. And I think the New York Times sort of coined this phrase when talking about him because he was an executive producer, head writer of that show. And Steven Spielberg and Michael Crichton were also executive producers on that show. Crichton had written a movie script for Spielberg's company, which John adapted into a television pilot. And so I believe in an effort to sort of let people know that who was actually running the show, they created this title of showrunner, which they called John Wells. And then suddenly everybody who was an executive producer on a show, but was actually running the show on a day to day, became known as a showrunner. In our case, we have 8 executive producers. So if I were just known as an executive producer, the uninitiated, as you call them, may not understand who does what on the show. So by having the title showrunner, people can expect that it is me who is on the show day to day, running the show and making decisions.
It seems like such a simple definition because the title itself implies the meaning, but for all the decades I ever watched TV, I only just came across that term showrunner just like in the last few years, but it goes all the way back to ER. I did not know.
Yeah. And I believe we just got the that title codified in our most recent contract with the companies, the WGA did. It has just been it's been a casual title, not an official title. So you see my name on this TV show, it's not going to say showrunner John Wirth. It's going to say executive producer.
So this is your second season with Dark Winds. What do you bring to the table in terms of creative vision and collaborating with partners involved in the series?
I think the most valuable thing I bring to the party is experience. I've written a lot of episodes of television and produced a lot of episodes of television and run television shows for years. That's an important thing to have on a TV show, somebody who can wrangle all the parties. I really don't come to this show with any kind of institutional knowledge about the storytelling. I know how to tell a mystery story and a detective story, but I'm not native, so I don't pretend to, be able to tell a story from a Navajo perspective, for example. We have 6 writers here. 4 of them are native. We have 2 Navajo consultants who are in the room all the time. Our entire cast is native. Chris Eyre, one of our executive producers, is native, of course. So the sort of heart of the show that is indigenous really comes from other people who are indigenous. And the Navajo part of the story is deeply vetted by our Navajo writers and our Navajo consultants. I just sort of make sure the whole thing kind of comes together, that we can take that aspect of the show and marry it to a detective mystery story and have one aspect support the other. There are a lot of mystery shows on television and detective stories. Some of them are set in Chicago, and that's the Chicago part of the story that's interesting. And some of them are set in New York, and it's the New York part of the story. Or, they're set in the Northwest or Alaska, like the Jodie Foster thing, True Detective this season. This happens to be set on the Navajo Nation, and I think that's what sets it apart from any other detective mystery story on television right now.
By the way, I notice in the news wires that Dark Winds just got the nod for season 4, just a couple weeks ahead of the season 3 premiere. So, congratulations.
Thank
Uh,
you.
what makes this series so successful, in your opinion?
I think it's kind of what we were just talking about. It's a compelling mystery story. It's very specific in terms of the culture of the show because it's set on the Navajo Nation. I think people are intrigued by that. The visuals are absolutely stunning. Unlike any other TV show, we are filming out there in the Southwest. So it has its own look. We have a wonderful cast led by the extraordinary Zahn McClarnon. He's absolutely watchable. He's one of those guys that I think there's a certain category of actor who people in your business kind of give a nod to this, like it's, oh yeah, that guy, And I think with Zahn, he's done so much work, both in film and television, and I think most people have seen him, and when they see him, they're like, oh, that guy. But this show, he's really become Zahn McClarnon, where people now put a name to him, and he is an absolutely brilliant actor, a wonderful partner, and his performance is compelling in the series, I think, particularly in season three. Have you seen season three?
I have seen a few episodes from season three. I'm probably about halfway down through the pre-screen. Just the depth and the talent that he brings to the role. Yeah, I really got to know him through Reservation Dogs, where he plays a very much different law enforcement character, Big.
That's for sure. Big.
Yeah. And when I interviewed Zahn, I had to ask him if Big and Joe Leaphorn ever were teamed together. Do you think they would get along?
That's a
And
funny question.
it's a funny scenario. And I think after a quick pause, he said Joe Leaphorn would probably make Big sit in the corner and do paperwork while he figured out the mystery himself.
That's funny. Uh,
A couple more questions here. John, you're doing great. How do you approach culturally sensitive subject matter in a way that doesn't replicate the more dated, stereotypical portrayals of Native Americans that we've seen in the previous century of Hollywood Westerns and the like?
Um, it's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it because we spend a lot of time talking about it here in this writer's room. I have the sense, without denigrating Hillerman's accomplishments or his work at all, I have a sense that he took the Navajo story and told it through his own lens. And that worked very well for someone like me who was, devoted to all of his novels, when I was a young man reading those books. But I think it was, somewhat off-putting for indigenous people who were, reading that stuff. What I really wanted to do on this TV show was reappropriate the stories back to the Navajo people. So rather than telling it from Hillerman's lens, I wanted to take his stories and tell them through the Navajo lens. To that point, we work very hard to make sure that we are telling this story from a Native perspective, and we are honoring all of the aspects of Native culture that we are talking about, and we are sensitive to all of the things that would not be appropriate to put on television. And that's changed really with the times. 2025 is a lot different from the 1970s when these stories were told in the beginning, in the first place. So even Hillerman would be writing these stories differently were he writing them now, I think.
And I think too, even though I believe you and many others have tried to translate and interpret Hillerman's novels for a television series, that even though he seems to have worked with the Navajos and gained their trust and their insight for his writings, being able to turn this production over to a largely Native American cast with a lot of Native writers and crew, I think kind of ensures a deeper level of authenticity. Is that accurate to say?
Yes. Yeah. And very much of a different perspective on the same story, which I think is what makes the show unique. I mean, I love the Hillerman stories. I love what he did. I love his story of how he came to tell these stories. But I also love the thing that our TV show has become, which has separated itself from the original stories in that we're telling it from this different perspective. It's like you and me standing on opposite corners of an intersection and seeing a car accident, and I have one version of it and you have another version of it because we are just coming from different places, the same accident we saw, but from different points of view.
Isn't there a Kurosawa film that takes a story and tells it from multiple characters' views, and the story changes because of the way the each respective character witnesses it? I think it was called
Yeah.
Rashomon or something. Yeah, I'm just
Yeah. We're doing a little bit of a Rashomon with Hillerman now for this series.
well, John, we probably have just a few seconds left here, so I'll just give the Is there anything else at all that you would like to add about Dark Wind's third or even fourth season for that matter, or anything about working on the show that you'd like to mention that I haven't asked you about yet?
The show is it's very we're telling it for two audiences. We're telling it for, well, actually probably more, but we're very careful about telling the Navajo story, and by extension, a story about Native Americans. And we have not just Navajo people working on the show, but we have a large group of Native Americans from many different tribes, and we've all kind of come together to create our own sort of Dark Winds tribe. It's a wonderfully functional, dysfunctional group of people. And all of us have the same desire to tell a really gripping story and to honor the traditions out of which these characters come, both the fictional world of Hillerman and also the historical world and the real world of the Navajo Nation. I think, it's a compelling story. There are so many stories that the show could outlive me. And I think, nobody will be disappointed spending an hour watching the show week in and week out, or spending 8 hours binging it if that's how they want to watch it. It's good television.